Welcome to tonight's discussion. We have a great discussion teed up for everyone tonight between Joe Sprangel, author of the new book, Humanist Manufacturing, a Humanitarian Approach to Excellence in High-Impact Plant Operations. Jackie's holding it up there. And Jackie Stavros, who wrote the foreword to this book and is a longtime colleague of Joe's. And I will introduce them both more fully in just a minute here. But first, wanted to say that we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So please put your questions into the chat as we go along. All right, so I would like to introduce our speakers this evening. Jackie Stavros is a management consultant and professor in the College of Business and Information Technology at Lawrence Technological University. She has co-authored many articles and books, including Conversations Worth Having, Using Appreciative Inquiry to Fuel Productive and Meaningful Engagement, and Learning to Soar, Creating Strategy that Inspires Innovation and Engagement. Joe Sprangel is an associate professor of business at Mary Baldwin University. He's also the founder and principal consultant of Emmanuel Strategic Sustainability. He blends his academic and industry backgrounds to redefine the role of manufacturing. He transitioned to higher education after 28 years of manufacturing industry experience. And he is also the author of the brand new book published today, Humanist Manufacturing. So Joe, congratulations and welcome to Jackie and to everyone who is joining us tonight. So now, Jackie, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jenny. Welcome, everybody. And I guess I want to start with, as Paul Stavros put in the chat, congratulations to Joe. Both Jenny and I know what it takes to get a book to this stage. And I read at least 3 drafts of the book before it got to this stage. And it's really exciting. I am going to hold this up so you can see the book in print. The first thing I did when I got my signed copy is I went to Amazon, knowing what it's like to be an author, and I ordered 5 copies. And I think what you're going to hear in our conversation is it doesn't matter what type of business you're in. This can be applied to any organizations. And I decided I wanted to read something from the foreword to you, just a couple parts, and then you're going to have to buy the book to read the rest of the foreword. But I wrote down what stood out for me the most when I picked up this book was the word human. You know, manufacturing and human doesn't seem to go well together. And that it's both to invest in humankind and to be a kind human. And that's what Joe has been all of his life. He does both very, very well. And when you read the book, the final draft I read was written with such inspiration, humility, practicality, and also Joe has a sense of humor that comes across in his book. And I'm one that a person that doesn't like surprises. So my family knows that I find the Christmas gifts, the birthday gifts when they're around the house. And I'm going to read to you the last 2 sentences I wrote in Joe's foreword. And I said, if you really want to get to know Joe before starting the book, just jump to the last chapter first. It was my favorite chapter. Make sure you read the preface because it gives you Joe's why this book and why it's such a gift. And then jump to the last chapter and then go read the book because you can't put it down because you understand Joe's why and what the book is about. I'm not surprised, Joe, that you wrote this book. You know, it's the reason why 28 years ago I went in to get my doctorate of management. There was not a book like this out there. I wish I had had this early in my career. And so what I just want to do is kind of launch into Joe. It's in what this book is about. And Joe, maybe you could share a bit more about your background and how it shaped the writing of this book.
Yeah, so thank you, Jackie. It's wonderful to have all those kind words shared. And I've always had a passion for organizational excellence and strategy and change management during, as you mentioned, almost 30 years of manufacturing and then 15 years as an academic. And I would have always loved to have worked for a company that was either going after the Industry Week Best Plants or Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award or Shingo Prize, because I always wanted to be part of the best of the best. And for a lot of reasons, that didn't happen. And but as I went along, I also felt like something was missing. And so I decided to become a professor. One aspect of doing that is getting your doctorate degree, and that's where Jackie and I met. So I can still remember that first conversation. And then early on, you introduced me to a documentary on the work of Ray Anderson that was then chairman and CEO of Interface with So it's a really incredible story what he did starting back in 1995 when that wasn't the norm. And you know, his epiphany moment gave me one at the same time, and the sustainability message just really struck a chord with me. And then later on, Jackie introduced me to her SOAR framework and then subsequent Conversations Worth Having book. And these have really had a significant impact on me, and hopefully we'll have time to get to them later on. And then Chris Kane brought me to the attention of the B Corps work, is that business is a force for good. And that was another, you know, kind of really striking moment. And then along the way, I've studied different companies like Barry Waymiller, Cascade Engineering, again, Interface, Patagonia, among many others, that they all seem to have a similarity and a why that was looking to be an environmental and social benefit in addition to making money. And as I reflected, I wonder, why don't more people do this? You know, it just seems like if I can do the right things for people and the planet, well, why wouldn't I do it to actually make more profit at the same time? And part of what I saw was there's a lot of books out there on a variety of topics like change management, leadership strategy, and sustainability. But what I didn't see is something that kind of tied it all together, sort of A to Z approach to walk somebody from here's where I'm at today. I want to be somewhere else and significant in 4 years. So how do I make that happen? So that became my goal, to write a book that would help somebody to walk through leading a cultural transformation, either at any level in an organization or the entire organization. And as I worked through the various drafts of the book, I understood why nobody had taken this challenge on, because it really became an exercise in creatively shoving 100 pounds of stuff into a 5-pound bag. So, but that's kind of what brought me to write this book, Jackie.
So, you know, when I want to read the subtitle of the book, so you look at humanist manufacturing, those two words just do not connect. and the subtitle is A Humanitarian Approach to Excellence in High Impact Plant Operations. So I definitely think anybody who is operating a facility, a plant, is going to want to pick that up and say, what is this person talking about? So maybe you can start off with, and maybe break it down, like, what is humanistic manufacturing, and why humanist manufacturing? Maybe that's in the answer to that first question, but can you tell us more about what
Sure.
is humanistic manufacturing?
So ultimately, to me, it's a framework with unique requirements for completing a significant manufacturing operation transformation. Really one where company has a higher purpose than just making parts, making money, and that sort of thing. And it includes 6 different phases. And the first is actually understanding and adopting and integrating the 10 humanist commitments that I cover in the first chapter. And then it's about leadership development. And it's kind of taking a step back and looking, who am I today, and what is different about what's happening today, what's happening in the future, that maybe I need to shape and find what I am as a leader, and maybe adopt some things that I hadn't thought about before. And then there's a focus on developing your internal operations to create an environment where the employees can be successful and helping carry out whatever the why and the mission is that the company has developed. And then it's a lot about being an employee-centric workforce. I've had really tremendous success in working and in creating an environment where people care about each other. They trust us as leaders. They trust that we're doing the right thing for them. And then part of what I focus on is I really want us to make a positive impact on the community that we're part of. That, we should be more than just somebody that comes in, utilizes, and uses up the resources in a community and then leaves these abandoned factories behind. And then ultimately, once you've gone through those 5 phases, then it's all about, okay, well, now that I've got this new perspective, I need to do some strategy planning. And then, a lot of people do strategy, but then I don't think they focus on the tactical and then the change management process itself. So again, really focusing on everything that needs to happen in a logical format. And I remember you and I talking about, a SOAR framework and what should it be, or should it be called something else? And for me, the framework analogy makes sense because, what I talk about, no one's going to adopt everything, and nor should they, but they should look at these different things and say, okay, well, what makes sense for my organization? And I use kind of this construction analogy where I think the book gives you kind of a foundation and a rough end of the structure, but then the leader needs to help work with the people on their team to figure out, well, what are the cabinets and the flooring and the plumbing fixtures that we want to adopt? So, and it's where it's at now. As you know from your own work, this will evolve over time.
Yeah, I like two things I like about this, Joe, is you called it a framework. You listened. When you build a model, people pick apart your model. They want you to defend your model. And I want to talk more about that in your why, because you're absolutely right. These 6 phases you have, first of all, you could buy, there's thousands of books on leadership development, employee centric, but you managed to pull it all together. And there's also visual in the book of why a framework is flexible and fluid. And this is like, you can read it once and then you can go back and say, I need to do more leadership development, or you can go back. Can you just give us more of why you went into calling it a framework? I was really glad you did.
Well, I had a great mentor that helped me to understand why it should be a framework, but it really is that approach that I was talking about, that, no single individual has all the answers, right? I've taken information from hundreds of different authors and kind of brought it together in such a way that, it's just, here are the various steps that are required to make this something that could be very transformational. I mean, a lot of organizations where strategy was taking the old one off the shelf, kind of dusting it off, changing a few dates and so forth, and then sticking it back on the shelf sort of thing. And what I'm looking for here is to help companies really make a significant transition from whatever it is you are today. I'd really like you to be something that's having a wonderful impact, both internally to all your stakeholders, but externally to the community in which you're part of. And so, there's no one way to do it, but here's a series of steps that can kind of guide you through the thought process.
So I want to go through the 6 phases. And this is a time of the year where people make their New Year's resolutions, right? And then we all break them like we do. And so one thing I've been reading a lot is intentions. And so what I like about the first part of your book is you have humanist commitments. And so could you explain, I know there's 10, you don't have to go into all 10, maybe what are these? How do they evolve? Are they in order? But tell us more about humanist commitments and how did they evolve? How did you come up with these?
Yeah, so I was reading a book by Bob Chapman that is about his approach, and they look at their employees as family, and they treat them like that. They really do a nice job of making sure that, not only do they have a good job that they enjoy going to, but they actually like going home as well, because, or the people they work with like it, because they don't come home exhausted and angry and upset and so on and so forth. And so as I was looking through what he was doing, the word human popped out. And so I did a search on that, and that's what led me to finding these 10 commitments that I share in the book. And, it's just all about creating an environment that looks at individuals' worth and dignity, where you respect them, you nurture them, you support them. And we have an ethical responsibility to help people reach their highest potential.
And Linda Martunas in the chat said, I love how you start with the human focus. And I have to agree with her. That is so foundational to the book. So phase 1 is the humanist commitments. Was there anything about the word humanism that concerned you, and what made you this is what it is going to be, humanitarian, humanistic? Was there any concerns you had about this?
Yeah. So, one of the things in the description is that it's looking at doing these things without a theism or a supreme being sort of concept. And as a Christian, it was like, well, I do believe there is a supreme being out there. But what I found is that I don't care who you are, these 10 commitments that I talk about, when you're talking about altruism or environmentalism or ethical responsibility, they all make sense. And if you're going to work for a company that's going to be somebody that people want to come work for, adopting these 10 commitments really is going to make you a desirable place that the one thing I love about our younger generations is they aren't asking us to do the right thing. They're demanding it. If you don't have values that align with theirs, you're not going to have employees. So, go young generations, because we really need that. The world needs a lot of positive change. And I'm seeing that coming from them. And it's really wonderful.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question and then lead into another one so we can help those listening. When you talk about, so it's a framework, it's fluid, and you have these 6, you call them phases, right?
Yes.
Do you have to go phase 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in that order? Or could you start with, even though I agree with what Lisa's saying, the second phase is to focus on the leader. Why is this one next? So is it important to go in that order, and then maybe you could get into why you put, and it makes sense why leader would follow next. I'm just curious.
Yeah. So part of what I believe in is that if we're a leader, we need to model what we expect others to do. And if we're going to ask other people to step back and take a real, strong stock of themselves and who they are and what they've been doing, we better do that ourselves first. And part of that is, one of the other commitments is empathy. If we work through that process and understand the struggles that we have in trying to address something that maybe we haven't wanted to address, but we have an epiphany during this that we say, I need to be something different than what I've been. Well, then as our leadership team works through it, and then eventually other people in the organization do this, I'm going to have more empathy for them because I've experienced what they're going through, and I can share my story. And if I share my story and tell people, I really struggled with this. These are some of the things that I had an issue with. Well, then aren't they going to buy into what you're doing, more wholly than they would if you just said, go do this? So that's a lot of the reason why I have that as the second phase. They talk about mirror neurons, right? That just people watching us will start to take on actions that we do. And so, I'm a strong believer that our actions need to be very much what we're hoping to see from those in our care.
So, when I talk about leadership, it seems that it may be something that could be difficult for someone to do on their own. Is this kind of, you read the book and a do-it-yourselfer, or again, it goes back to your intention behind the book, or is coaching and support needed to do leadership development and to get through these phases?
I think it really depends on the person and what they're capable of doing. But part of the reason, the book kind of tells you why we should do it. And then I've got a workbook course that I'm developing that'll be kind of a self-paced option that will show people how to do some of the things, right? How to work through developing your why, how to develop your values and so forth, how to go through and do maybe an audit of the current processes or materials that you're using to see if there's an environmental or social issue with them. So, and then in some cases, maybe just people don't have enough time, and having someone like myself come in and help them work through the process a little more quickly might be beneficial as well.
So I noticed Paul asked a question. So I'm kind of watching the chat, kind of asking you questions live. And so Paul said, as young people demand more from their organization, do you feel more companies are getting the message? Or is why maybe this book is needed and why you started off with those 2 phases first?
My experience has been that companies don't value their employees as strongly as they should, right? There's Sir Richard Branson, for example, says that, our customer isn't the person or the people that we should put first. We need to put our employees first. And I really believe that because, as he mentioned, and I've seen myself, if you take good care of your employees, everything else takes care of itself. And, we need to invest so much more time and energy into making sure that our employees are successful, because if they're not, everything's going to be a challenge. And so that's a lot of the reason why I really have this human focus in this book. And, the examples of the companies that I profile in the book, I hope will be impetus for people to say, oh, well, if it works for Cascade Engineering, or it works for Barry Waymiller and Interface. And so, the stories that they have are just so compelling. Ray Anderson said that their company would have gone bankrupt several times if they hadn't adopted these things, because they wouldn't been able to absorb the inefficiencies and the ineffectiveness of running their operation in a poor manner. And so by doing these things, they saved a lot of money. They were able to be more competitive. They were able to withstand, the cyclical nature of what happens in our economy.
So one of the next questions I have for you, and this really aligns with a shift in my research agenda when it comes to the language of strategy, this next question. And it was at the time I was reading, again, the final copy of your book. So, those of you that had a course on strategy, you know what values, vision, mission is. I want to focus on the word mission, because you pick up a textbook and you see the word mission, and mission is the purpose of the organization. And I've actually began writing something different. Mission is what the organization does. This is the type of organization. This is what we do and who we do it for. Purpose is different. Purpose is your why. And you get into that, the why is transformational. And organizations who understand this is what the business and who, but when they get people in the why, it kind of brings in the passion. And so you bring that in. Why do you think it's an integral part of the self-evaluation and bringing in the importance of why?
Yeah, I kind of defer to Simon Sinek on this, because his video on why has over 17 million views, but I'm pretty sure most leaders aren't doing this. And it's like, well, it seems people are thirsting to understand why they want to work for an organization. So I really think it's important for a leader to understand why they exist. And if they only exist to make money and to make themselves richer and, so they can buy another vacation home or a nicer car or, whatever, that's not going to be enough. And again, I go back to these younger generations, they want to work for a company that is doing something that benefits society, or is doing something to improve the environment. And, I still keep going back to the really cool thing about it is if you are environmentally and socially responsible, you actually make more money. So, there's no reason not to do it. Even if you only want to make more money, you should still do it, because it's the right thing to do. And so, one of the leaders I profile in a book is Michael Perron, who has Impact Makers. He started the company to be able to give back the profits to help the various members of the community in which he lives. And that's really compelling, because he was able to allow me to do some research with his company. And when I interviewed the various people that work there, they glowed when they talked about working for Impact Makers. They loved the fact that the work they were doing was beneficial to the community in which they lived. And one individual remarked that, I don't have to be on boards on weekends and evenings. I actually do this kind of work every day in my life. And if people want work-life balance, well, it's wonderful to be able to have a job where you're actually making a really positive impact on something that's really important to you, so that maybe you can focus a little more time on your family, for example.
Yeah, I still haven't figured out the work-life balance, but I have figured out the work-life integration. And that's the key, is you say, workplaces should be fun. You can have it becomes like a family. And I really love M. Whitney said, a question she asked us, what is the only thing in this plant that gains value to it's you. You have to gain value. And so I think that's really awesome. Now I want to keep moving, because there's 6 phases, and we could talk about leadership the rest of the time, but can you tell us a little bit more about, and you don't see as many writings on what phase 3 is about, the internal operations and what that's about.
Yeah, so Jared Ruger, who's on this call with us, is the person that said, hey, you got to be focusing on what your business operating system is. And it really made a lot of sense, because if you don't have strong, robust business systems, you're not going to be able to be successful. And I've experienced this in companies where they just didn't have, no one knew what to do. If something happened, what are you going to do? But part of what I look at is that I love the B Corp B Impact Assessment model. It really does a great job at helping companies work through this process to be a very responsible business. But I also like that they've integrated the UN Compact elements into it as well. But then I'm really big on lean because it's all about eliminating waste and doing things in a much more efficient and effective manner. And then ultimately, Deming did his 14 points for leadership, like in 1982, but they're extremely relevant in this day as well. So I love the fact that, you can take kind of a hybrid of all of this and put it together in a way that, this framework idea, right? How is it going to best work for my particular individual company? Like, for example, the B impact assessment doesn't tell you how to do things. It just asks you what is it that you do? And is it in alignment with what we're expecting if you're going to be a B Corp certified company?
Okay, so are there any suggestions, like when you think of a operations or a business operating system that can lead to, because there's a lot out there about operating systems, but the development, what makes it unique to be a humanist manufacturing operations? Because you put the
Well, I just think the biggest thing is that everything that you're doing is pointing to that focus to create an environment that's giving your employees the best possible opportunity to be successful. And, again, if we do that, we eliminate a lot of waste and inefficiency, but we also create an environment where people are happy to come to work because I talk about pushing people, optimal tension. It's kind of that level where, you're pushed to a point where you feel like you're a valuable contributor and you're making a positive impact on the organization that cares about you, but you're not pushed so far that you can't do whatever it is that's asked of you, right? But it's pushing you a little bit beyond what you think you can do. And isn't that always more rewarding when you've done that to me, Jackie, and a lot of my work that I did while I was a student of yours or in different things that we've done together. You've pushed me, over that little bit of edge that, I can't do that. Oh, yes, you can,
curiosity is
get it
helpful
done.
for you.
Exactly.
So we're halfway through the phases, and can we jump into phase 4, which is about creating an employee-centric workforce? I know we've heard of that, but can you explain what does this mean when you're employee-centric with a humanistic manufacturing framework?
Yeah. So, I go back to, I'll give it a couple of examples of the commitments. One is that I will strive to be more ethical. And, sometimes it's hard. You're pushed into a corner. Maybe there's an issue with a customer. Boy, if we don't bring this up, maybe they won't notice it and so on. And, nobody wants to work for a company that, when things get gray and murky, they start to cut corners or to take actions that they aren't happy with. Or one of them is environmentalism. And, I'm old enough that when we first started working, we were dumping coolant in the creek behind the plant, and it's like, I can't imagine that, people would do that these days. I hope they don't. And I still remember the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland. It caught fire multiple times. I mean, here's a waterway that's catching fire because there's so many chemicals in it. And so it's creating an environment where you use these principles to make sure that people are proud of who they work for. They know that people care about them. They're given an opportunity to bring their best self to work. They're given the opportunity to maybe get promoted if they desire to, or to go back and get some schooling, or to help advance a social cause that's important to them. And so there really is a lot about that. And, if we really like where we're at, what we're doing, who we're doing it for, you just go above and beyond. You don't have to ask people to do things. They just do it because they are so committed and invested in the company that they work for. And so that's a lot of what it's about, is how can I help individuals thrive, and that can then help their group thrive, and then how do we help the entire organization thrive?
Yeah, and there's a quote by David Cooper writer that says, people's lives and the people's lives in the organization, they flourish or flounder one conversation at a time.
Yeah.
So, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care about them. And if
Exactly.
you fuel them with that, you're right. Take care. I think it was Branson said, if you can fuel them with that, your employees, they're going to take great care of your customers.
Yeah.
Let's go into phase 5, which was creating, and it's not just moments in time, positive impact, but it's how do you keep it ongoing positive impacts in an organization?
Yeah.
What does that mean, and how do you do that?
this is where I'd focus on what it means to be a thriving, part of a thriving community. And so I'll ask Jenny to bring Fred on at this point, Keller, because they're a great example of what you can do to be a community participant that helps an organization to be successful and not only making it a great place to work for themselves, but they can also be a really strong contributor to community. And so, Fred, thank you for joining us tonight. And you talk about, you have a new formula where business should be judged on its financial performance plus its impact. Can you share a little bit more about what this means to you?
Well, thank you, Joe, thank you for writing this book. Jackie, you talked about humanists and manufacturing not going necessarily together, but an academic that has experience with manufacturing is a unique thing, and Joe brings that to this book, and I'm thrilled to be a little part of it. And the idea that we're in a new world is a little bit of a misconception because, as Joe knows, this goes back to the 19th century where people were talking about the cost of production. But it's something that for me, I was just trying to do what I could as a child of the 60s to live up to the principles of how do we have a business that works for everyone. And so I was just focusing on that, and that was what drove me. And as we got into this a little bit, we found out that it's really not a bad thing for business. It's actually a good thing for business. So there's a synergistic effect, but I always like to think you have to start with your own do the right thing. And then you can figure out how to make it, work for your business.
Yeah, thank you. And you've previously stated that the opportunity to solve social and environmental problems is huge. Can you share an example or two of those that have benefited not only the stakeholders you impacted, but how's it benefited your company, and maybe what are some of the positives and the challenges that come from doing that?
Yeah, a real easy one on the environmental side is going to zero waste. That's an easy one. We had recycle warriors. They were called themselves. They went on the dumpster dives and figured out how they could recycle things. And we got to the point where we recycled everything and saved, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year that goes to the landfill, and it's all recycled at this point. So that's an easy one.
Yeah.
Another easy example on the other side, on the social impact side, is we all know that we have a real opportunity when it comes to folks who have been formerly incarcerated to give them a starting point when they get out. And that's what we've done. And we've found that that's also an easy one because they're so appreciative of the opportunity to have their work. They're hard workers. We've never had any bad incidents. And it's really been a really easy thing to incorporate into our business.
And just to kind of wrap it up, how does doing this help your community to thrive?
Well, that's a more complex. We could talk about that for a long time. But the idea is that as we do these things, that I think I've said it recently. I'm tired of being an exemplar. We just do what comes to us naturally, and more folks ought to be doing it. And I think that's the value of this book. And as you do, people recognize it in our community in the West Michigan area. We're recognized as an organization that really cares about people, and we really have an opportunity to influence others to try the same thing. So for instance, we have a large cohort now of manufacturers who are and other businesses that are willing to hire folks that have formerly been incarcerated.
Great.
And that's been a big impact. That's just a small example.
Well, and I think that's how it works, right? Is if everybody's doing something, everybody is better, right? And I think about my own life. There have been situations where I've done a stupid thing a time or two where I could easily been put in prison, right? And, thankfully, it didn't happen. But there's so many really good people that maybe they've just had a bad, just a, it could have been a momentary lapse, and otherwise they're a great person. So
How many people want to be defined by their worst day?
exactly. So thank you, Fred. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Well, Jackie, I've talked a lot so far, but if you could touch just for a couple of minutes on your conversations worth having and why that's been so beneficial first, and then just a little bit about how the SOAR framework is beneficial in creating an environment like we're talking about trying to make happen here. I appreciate it.
Sure, I will. And then we're going to get to phase 6, okay? And then there's some questions.
Well, this is phase 6. So.
Okay, so we'll get to, all right. Okay, we can talk about that. And so conversations worth having. The reason I went to get my doctorate of management, that was like, oh gosh, maybe 25, 30 years ago, was I needed to understand the human side of organizing. And that's what this book reminds me of is I was really good with brand development, international business development. You were really good at running a plant 30 years ago. And there was wisdom in people to say, but organizations are also about people.
Yeah.
So and again, this was back in 1995, and I learned something called AI. And every time I say the word AI, several of you know me, people will say artificial intelligence 99% of the time. And then I always say, you have to stay and listen to my presentation because I'm going to talk about appreciative inquiry. And I look at that as an operating system. And it's simply that, imagine if when we walk into organizations, appreciate is, I value you, I value what we're going to talk about, and we're going to have a conversation that adds value. And it's not me talking at you, it's you and I talking together, and we're asking questions. And questions, when I ask you a question, I can put you into a protect mode. And we've been sitting here for 40 minutes, but just stretch your hands up so I can see you out there, everybody. Stretch your hands up. And I want you to put your hands behind your head. When you get in that protect mode, where are your thumbs, everybody? Yeah. Come on, Jay, you're not doing this with me. Your thumbs are down. And that's because some words can put people into protect mode. So what we want you to do, Peter's working with me, but Peter, stretch your up. Everybody stretch your hands up. Come on, Roseanne. Put your hands in front on your forehead. This is, I got Jay with me now. Jay, this is the executive function of your brain. That's what it's called, the prefrontal lobe. Where are your thumbs, Jay? Jeff, they're up. And so it's our words. It is our words that create productivity and engagement. So that's why I was so excited Joe got this from the moment I met him in 2004 as a plant manager. And if you think about this, when you are awake, from when you roll out of bed in the morning to when you go to bed at night, how many of your awake hours are you in conversations with yourself on your communicators, keyboard, phone, and in person? You just think about that. How much time are you communicating in person? Most people will say 90 to 100. I had somebody today say 120% of their time when they're awake, they're communicating.
Yeah.
And so that's a little bit of, it took me 25 years to figure out it's our conversations. They're the heart of how we interact. Yeah. And that's the same thing. To me, appreciative inquiry is like this operating system for a humanistic manufacturing organization. And that's what conversation is about. It's appreciate the way you ask questions and how you ask questions, because you want people to work in a connect mode. So that's my excitement about conversations worth having. SOAR actually came out before conversations worth having. That's because nobody would ever read a 300-page dissertation. And SOAR is very simple. It's a framework. It's when I'm going to have a conversation with you about strategy and strategic planning, let's talk about strengths. What are we doing well? What are the opportunities here? What is it that we aspire to? What our clients, our customers aspire to? And that gets back to what you've talked about tonight. And we do need measurable results at the end of the day. So it's just simply a framework to guide strategic conversations. And that's It's that simple.
Well, and what I love about it is that you don't ignore weaknesses and threats, but you reframe them as opportunities, right? And it's such a simple concept, but I've experienced the power of it so many different times in very many organizations where I've done it. Is that by focusing on the positive, reframing things as opportunities, and what do we aspire to become, really does drive wonderful results. So yeah, I think we've kind of got to a point where maybe we need to stop and let a few
Yeah.
questions be asked.
Yeah, so I want to know, just before we get to questions, Joe, is there anything else you want to say before you head over to the Q&A?
There's hours of stuff I can share, but we're good.
All right, great. Well, we have some great questions teed up, and this has been fascinating so far. Thank you both. All right, so Paul says, why do you think more CEOs don't adopt a more humanist model? Is it fear, ignorance, control, something else?
I think one of the, people are just so consumed with the day-to-day. They're fighting fires all the time, and it just really makes it difficult. I think if you pulled people, put them on a desert island somewhere and said, okay, we're not letting you off until you figure out what it is that, you really want to do. I think human nature is to do the right thing. And part of it is, I share this Bob Chapman in the book. And part of it is what we were taught in when we were in college, or what we were taught by our mentors when we first started out. A lot of people think they're doing the right thing, but as we know, they're not necessarily. And that, we really do have to reshape what business is about, right? It's not about exploiting people and exploiting resources. It's about lifting everybody up, treating them as humans, and just creating an environment where everybody can thrive.
All right, thank you. Jan says, I think this concept applies to service businesses, even small ones as well.
Yeah.
And then she adds, do you plan to show us how to apply this, or does your course do this? And she says government could also use this approach, and nonprofits. And she's also curious why you chose to focus on manufacturing.
Well, so I did this recognized expert course with Dory Clark, who Jenny and some others on this call have done. And so part of it is you want to figure out what your niche is, right? And what I know well is manufacturing and how to be very successful in a manufacturing environment. But I did joke with somebody that, I've got like 15 books lined up now. I can have humanist manufacturing. I can have humanist healthcare. I can have humanist hospitality, and so on and so forth. All I got to do is change the examples, and and it works. It works for everybody. And so, no, I probably won't write those books, but yeah, this approach works everywhere.
You could. This time next year, we'll be back for this. No, but seriously, once you have your model, right? I think one of your points is your model then can be applied in different contexts because the same principles.
I wanted something I could hand to potential clients to be able to say, this is what Joe Sprangel's about. If your manufacturing operation is interested in doing at least part of what is in here, then I'm happy to help you. But if not, then we're probably not a good fit. And so, that's who I wrote it for, is somebody that wants to make a difference. If it's one person at a time, that's okay. I'm only one person too.
Yeah, terrific. Okay, so Tony says this is very inspiring, and he says congratulations. And his question is, how do you suggest applying the humanist principles to hiring or interviewing new employees, or applying empathy to firing employees?
Yeah. So one of the things that I am doing in the workbook course is I've created a lot of assessments that somebody can kind of work through to say, am I a person that exhibits humility, or am I a person that acts ethically, and so on and so forth. And so I think if somebody were to do that course, they could actually pull those assessments out and say, oh, okay, well, here's some questions that I should ask. And one of the things I love that we didn't touch on was that Patagonia, if you know anything about Yvon Chouinard, the French pronunciation, he's a very humble man, and they've built humility into their hiring process. If at any point during the process somebody exhibits that they are not a humble person, they're done. They don't move on. They could be the most qualified, most exceptional candidate in the world, but if they don't have humility, Patagonia doesn't want to. And Patagonia is a $3 billion company, so they're probably doing something well, right?
That's awesome to tell people to pay attention to what your values are as an organization in the hiring process.
And that's, when you touch on that, that reminds me as well that we really do need to be sharing those values and asking questions about, do these people give answers that align with our values? And if they don't, again, they're not a good fit, and I know it's hard to find people, but is it really worth it to have the wrong people? And, I'd rather take more time to find the right person.
We have another question that's come in anonymously here. The B Corp concept seems tailor-made to achieve both profitability and other goals within an existing legal framework. Why has adoption of B Corp status been so limited?
I've watched that through several iterations now, and it's a very expansive, detailed assessment. And, I think a lot of people, they just don't have the time. And what I always get frustrated with is that people don't have time to do things the right way, but they have time to keep doing the things wrong, right? Or not as efficiently and effectively. And so I always maintain that you ought to separate a certain part of your organization to focusing on fixing all these problems that are occurring, so that you can shift more resources over to doing the things that will help you to become a better company. And so and when you think about it, it's really still early in the infancy of an approach. And talk about Fred Ray Anderson. Fred too. He started about the same time. They were doing these things back in the 90s and in the 2000s. But when you think about the history of business, it really isn't that long, right? And so, the more and more of these stories of why it makes sense, and that if you do focus on, I keep hitting on this, but if you do focus on doing the right things environmentally and socially, you actually do make more money. And so, the more of these stories of the Cascade Engineerings and Barry Way-Miller companies and so forth, I think you will see people begin to adopt more and more. And if they don't, they won't be around.
All right, I think we have time for maybe one more question. What do you think, Jackie, here? Another one?
I think we do.
Okay. Mark says, congratulations. And do you identify example key performance metrics for the in-process phases and outcomes, or design specs and characteristics of what ought to be measured in a humanist manufacturing performance dashboard?
Yeah. I don't, it goes back to, again, this being a framework. I would encourage people to do that. And when Jackie was talking about the SOAR framework, results is one of the phases that it's part of that. And so whatever the company is, in my opinion, they need to work through and figure out, well, what are the results that are most applicable to what they're doing as an organization. Some of those are going to be driven by, regulatory agencies and that sort of thing. So you always want to put those in. But if you also have, a goal to be more environmentally friendly, okay, well, what are the things that your organization is doing? Are you using lots of water and flushing it, through the waste stream instead of recycling it somehow? And so, it's almost like that low hanging fruit thing, right? Go out and figure out where your biggest bang for the buck is initially, do that, and then go find another project and another project. And, I talk in the book about, how to do this. It's like eating an elephant, right? It really is that, there's so much to do. You just need to go in and do it a bite at a time. And I'm sure, people like Fred would tell you, he didn't do this overnight. It's a lifetime of work that he's been doing this and to get the company where it's at. So, so yes, results are important, but I don't know what your specific results should be.
Very wise, Joe. Yes.
All right. Let me see where we are in our order of events here. I think we're good and we're in good shape. I'm going to turn it back over to you, Jackie, for some final remarks.
Well, I actually gave my final remarks in the waterfall.
Oh, okay.
So
super.
It's about 7:56. So I guess, Joe, you said you had some closing comments that I want to let you have the last words.
All righty. Thanks, Jackie. Well, as most of you know, I really want to thank my wife for this, because I've been squirreled away for quite a while writing this book, and she's been an immense blessing over what we're celebrating 45 years of marriage on Thursday this week. So I can't believe that. It's incredible. I love her more today than I ever have. So thank you. And then if anybody's interested in writing a book, I really endorse having Jenny support you through this process. writing the actual book's only half of it. Getting it published and putting it on all the various sites and so forth. She's just been wonderful in that regard, and I highly endorse her and
Well,
greatly
thank you very much.
appreciate her support.
Thank you. It's been fun working on this with you.
Yeah, thank you. And a lot of you that are on here have been integral to my success in many ways, some small, some significant. And I as I was watching a lot of the different words that people were sharing about me in the recent weeks, as I was, sharing that this was happening, it's almost like hearing your eulogy before you depart from the earth sort of thing, right? And I've really been moved by a lot of these wonderful sentiments that so many of you have shared. And I just encourage you, don't wait till people are dead to tell them these things, tell somebody tonight you appreciate them and you value them. And another person that I really want to shout out to is Fred Keller, who is the founder and chair of Cascade Engineering, who shared a few comments earlier. He's really been wonderful as he's given me an opportunity to have occasional conversations, and I've been able to float some things by him as I've worked my way through it. And, he's just been really helpful, very encouraging as I've done this. And, I was really grateful that he came tonight. And, he's a model of most of what I talk about in this book. So, Fred, I really appreciate you sharing your support, wisdom, and encouraging words. And then finally, Jackie, you don't even begin to know how you've positively impacted my life. As you reviewed my near final draft, you responded with all caps "wow" and a couple of exclamation points. And I got to tell you, my heart soared with joy, and there's some pun intended there, right? I soared with joy. And because you're somebody I highly respect, admire, and it just meant the world to me that you thought that I had done something worthwhile. And I was really grateful that you wrote the foreword and said so many wonderful things. So you just have been a real blessing. So that's it. It seems a bit surreal to be sitting here saying I'm no longer writing a book. I've written a book. So I appreciate all of the people that have ordered copies, and please share it with others that you think could benefit from it. And just again, I'm so grateful to have so many people that care about me, support me, and you're all a blessing. So I appreciate it deeply.
Well, Joe, thank you for sharing your knowledge with us tonight and in the book. And Jackie, thank you so much for leading such a great discussion with Joe. I felt like I was right back in business school. So that was terrific.
That's what we do.
That's right. That's right. Well, you get two business school professors together. It's got to be a fascinating discussion. So thank you both. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight, and have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny.